a different approach to dating and relationships. It's what you touched on in your video the other day. You talk about, you know, different music. You talk about different food. You talk about differences in how they approach relationships, differences in how they approach marriage. You know, when you were talking about the other day about the bride price and having to support the family, the difference with that is primarily because many Africans don't look at marriage as between two individuals. They look at marriage as you marrying the family.
What's good, Kinganda? It's your boy O'Shea Duke Jackson, back at it again with a very important collaboration. Make sure you guys come in and like the video and hit the subscribe button. But today I'm honored to have the Honorable Dr. Mark Echols. He is the proud author of African Diasporan Relationships. So I want to let him introduce himself and what he knows about this issue. Go ahead, brother.
Thank you, O'Shea Duke Jackson, future doctor yourself. I know you're in medical school. So I start off just telling O'Shea how much of an honor it is to be on this channel. I've followed him for a long time, a fan of much of what he does from his own channel, Celebrity Junk. And in particular, I've been a big follower and fan of the Kinganda channel, what he does on the continent, his focus on relationships in Africa and intercultural relationships between African Americans and Africans. It's a subject that I've been on for a very long time. For the past 22 years, I've been in African diaspora relationships exclusively, dating and ultimately being married to an African woman, and then later a Caribbean woman, resulting in 4 children. Okay. Between those 2 marriages. So intercultural relationships between Black people, African diaspora relationships. It is a subject that I have lived and live every day.
And you wrote the book on it, actually. Like when some people say they wrote the book on it, they be full of shit. But you actually wrote the book on it, which we will leave the link here, and I bought it myself just now. And when you contacted me, I thought this was very, very interesting. It has really great reviews. But let me ask you this, because your work on this particular subject predates YouTube.
It does.
So you're from the you're like me. We're both African Americans, right?
I am originally from Chicago.
From Chicago. Okay. What drew you to, just before we get into any of the actual work that you have written and understood, what brought you into your passion about the, just Africa and the African diaspora as a whole?
I'm glad you asked that. I've always had, just a natural love for my people. I know I followed you again for a long time. I know you're always focused and always talked about how you're pro-Black, love our people. I always have had that love for our people. I've been a Pan-Africanist before I knew what Pan-Africanism was. Growing up, being proud of being Black, reading Black studies, starting with the autobiography of Malcolm X, autobiography of Frederick Douglass. So when I went to school, prior into getting into the human behavior, I studied history, and specifically I studied African and diasporan history. So becoming familiar with our history, becoming familiar with the history of the diaspora, it kind of was a precursor to getting into the African diaspora relationships that I would soon enter. Okay.
And you PhD, talented man, author. One might want to know, because like yourself, I've dated, outside of the African American community, but you said you have exclusively dated out of out of our African American community and in the Caribbean and African community. Was there a specific reason that you felt maybe a little bit more closer to other communities instead of dating inside the African American community?
Okay, well, getting into that because it's a long story that I'll make short.
Okay,
I didn't deliberately make the change. One thing that I was interested in always was Black women.
Okay,
and because of my education and just my outlook,
okay,
I didn't separate between African American, Caribbean, African. They're all Black women to me.
Right.
So what happened was I moved from Chicago. I moved from the Midwest to New York in my mid-20s.
Okay.
And anyone that's familiar with New York would know that the foreign-born Black population in New York is high.
Right.
A third of the Black population in New York City is foreign-born, primarily from Africa and the Caribbean, also Afro-Latino. Okay. And depending on which borough you live in, that percentage can be even higher. Okay. So when I moved to New York as a single man interested in Black women, the majority of women I was encountering were foreign-born, African women and Caribbean women. At least women were beautiful. You're in Uganda. You know how African women are.
Okay, now.
You know how Caribbean.
We keeping it clean, but I know where you're going.
It's very easy on the eyes. Very easy on the eyes. Women were very feminine, intelligent, hardworking, and especially family oriented. And those were things that I was looking for as a man. I come from a traditional family. Okay. My parents have been married for 52 years, happily married for 52 years and counting.
Praise God. Okay.
So, yeah, praise God. You got it. So it's a type of coming up in that family environment. It's the type of family I was looking for myself. Always been family oriented. Always wanted to be a husband and a father. So when I moved to New York, began encountering and interacting with these women, it was a natural connection. I've always been the type to get in where I fit in. These were a group of women that their values matched what my values were, and it was a natural fit.
Can I ask a controversial question? Because
of course.
I want to ask a controversial question, Doc, because brothers such as yourself, guys like myself, guys who higher education in our realms of circles, there's a feeling from some Black men, at least not all, that dating within our community, a lot of times we didn't get sort of respect, or we were looked at as lames, and education amongst our community, amongst our women, what doesn't, there were of course push towards the elevation of education in their own right, but when it was guys like ourselves, there are many brothers that felt like, we didn't, like we were kind of corny or something like that. Whereas in the African and Caribbean communities, it was really pushed hard on education. They had more respect for it. Even in the Ivy League programs, you see most of the Blacks that are coming out are the Caribbean and the African population. Did you feel that Absolutely. Because of your educational achievements that in the African and Caribbean communities, your efforts could have been appreciated more by African and Caribbean women versus in the community that we come from?
Yeah, so it was appreciated, of course. Being educated, well-spoken, family-oriented are the things that African and Caribbean women found attractive to me. Okay. I wouldn't say that African American women can appreciate that. Okay. But they embraced it where I was. And again, I'm the type to get in where I fit in. That's where I found acceptance. That's where I found love. And again, the mutual values. So that's where I gravitated towards. In terms of where you were going, I knew what you were going to ask before you asked it. Of course, I've been on this subject again for 20 years. Right. I've heard it. I've been in these debates. Like you, I love our people. So I'm not the one to negatively compare and say, this group of women is better than that group of women. Right. I'm not going to do that. I just found that I found acceptance. I found love in this community, and that's where I gravitated towards.
Okay. And fair enough. So for those of you in the comments, won't be mad at me. I feel like there pluses and minuses wherever you go, right? And there's a lot of African American women that do respect education, and there's some that don't, whatever. But so I'm glad that you touched on that in a very eloquent way. Doc, talk to me about this, because you found acceptance dating in the African and Caribbean communities, but there are some differences than dating in our community. And I know you wrote the book on this, but as African American, as Black men, what are some of the differences that you've found that were different in dating in the African American community than dating in the African and Caribbean community?
The whole experience was different. It's hard to pinpoint one thing, and primarily because in Africa there's 3,000 different tribes in Africa. There are over 30 countries in the Caribbean, and then when you factor in South and Central America into that, Canada, Europe, the cultural differences of course are going to depend on what particular country or ethnic group that you're talking about. But you're talking about a different approach to dating and relationships. It's what you touched on in your video the other day. You talk about different music. You talk about different food. You talk about differences in how they approach relationships, differences in how they approach marriage. When you were talking about the other day about the bride price and having to support the family, the difference with that is primarily because many Africans don't look at marriage as between two individuals. They look at marriage as you marrying the family. So in terms of supporting the family, in terms of compensating for the loss of their daughter, the continued support that you have to give to the family, that is a reflection of how they view marriage and relationships. It's a community thing, not an individual thing. We come from an individualistic society. So
very true.
So marrying to a family that looks at the community, it's just a different mindset. And those are all the things that you have to be prepared when you're entering an African diaspora relationship.
So, I mean, because what I've noticed, Doc, was when I was, we talked a little bit before I started this, interview, kind of get to know one another. And what I figured out is when I was in Uganda, many things I used to find offensive, I had to really sit back and understand it years later and say, well, that's not really offensive. That's just how things are. It's not personal. This is just what the culture is. How long did it take you to get to that particular point, before you were able to adjust to that, or did you do it, fairly fast?
It took me a while, to be honest. And that's part of the experience. I spoke about, of course, doing your research. It's easier now to do that than it was when I entered these relationships 22 years ago. When I entered the relationships 22 years ago, of course, you had the internet, but you didn't have YouTube. You didn't have the type of wonderful programs that brothers like yourself put on. So you just had to do some general research. I had some experience and some understanding based on the studies that I had done. But even though you have to do your research, you won't understand everything you have to go through until you actually are in the relationship within that culture and you're experiencing it. So two things I'll talk about is doing your research, but not just doing your research, but being open-minded.
Okay.
You have to be open-minded to new experiences. You have to be open-minded to their customs, different cultures. You have to know so you don't offend. One example I talk about all the time is with my ex-wife. I went to Spain with her, and she was telling me, and she's an African woman. She came from Equatorial Guinea.
Okay.
that is next to Cameroon. It's a small country in Africa, so small that a lot of Africans aren't even familiar with it. But it's next to Cameroon. So we were in Spain one time, and a client of her father's took us out for dinner. So she was telling me that you have to eat everything. You know, if you don't eat everything, they're going to be offended. So I ate the rice. I ate squid. I never ate squid before in my life, but I ate squid. I ate the rice. I ate some other stuff I didn't even know what it was. And then there was a mayonnaise sauce that I was offered, and I can't stand mayonnaise. So I was like, no thanks. I'd eat everything else, but you know, no thanks on the mayonnaise. So after that, I ate, we talked, I thought it was good. And then, you know, she told me afterwards, no, you really offended that guy. Like, offended him how? I ate everything. I ate the squid. I ate the rice. I ate the other funny little stuff. I don't even know what it is. And she was like, yeah, but you didn't eat the mayonnaise sauce. And that was offensive to him. So you could offend in so many ways unintentionally. So that's why you have to be open-minded. You have to listen. And if you don't come with that understanding, you can make some mistakes, you know, some trivial mistakes, some small mistakes, some could be big, relationship threatening. So, you know, again, you have to learn as much as you can, but also be open-minded. You know, what you're experiencing in these relationships is going to be different than anything you encountered before.
Okay. So let me kind of Equatorial Guinea was one of the few only Spanish colonies.
It's the only Spanish colony.
The only one. Okay. So, but before dating her, I know you've been to Ghana, but have you ever dated anybody else in the African community besides someone from Guinea?
No, I dated Caribbean women before.
Okay.
Spoke with African women before, but that was my first major relationship, and of course, that one led to a marriage.
What is the difference between, because we know that there's a big difference between the African American community and the African American community and maybe in Africa, but the Caribbeans they're enough. Like you said, New York City, many of them were colonized by the British, and they have very similar names as we do, like Jamaica and Trinidad.
The slave experience.
Yeah, same slave experience. They seem to be more similar than maybe we are maybe with some Africans. But what's the difference, in your opinion, between dating a Caribbean woman and dating a woman from the continent of Africa? That's
a fascinating question. It's a question that I've posed many times over the years. I think the cultural gap is bigger between African American and African. Because of the amount of time that we've been separated from the continent. The first Africans landed in the U.S. in 1609, Roanoke and Jamestown, Virginia. I might get too historical here, so I won't try to get too deep. But since the early 1600s, we've been separated from our African roots and heritage. We have retained some customs. There was actually a fascinating documentary on Netflix recently, High on the Hog, which talked about the historical connections between Africa and African Americans through food. But with the exception of some of those traditions that have carried down, we've been separated from our African heritage for over 400 years. So many of the customs, many of the practices that we had from Africa has been lost, more so than even folks from the Caribbean. So it's a big adjustment to get used to that culture, because these practices, though historically they were the customs that we have come from, we've been away from home for a long time.
Okay, and in the Caribbean, in the African American dating as an African American man, what was maybe some of the differences, but or similarities that you found between Caribbeans and African Americans?
There's still going to be a lot of differences, eating different foods.
Okay.
I talk about in my book, that being my first introduction to the differences. Very American in my culinary taste. As said, pizza, hamburgers,
Okay.
fried chicken, soul food, those type of American dishes. And then, dating African women and Caribbean women, I'm eating jollof rice.
Okay.
I'm eating peanut soup, mafe. I'm eating okra soup. I'm eating Caribbean food, jerk chicken, roti, rice and peas. All these foods I was very unfamiliar with. So the type of food they eat, the type of music they listen to, was not a big fan of reggae music, but now listening to reggae music, just the love of travel, how they approach family, the respect that they give to their elders, just the way that they think, the way that they look at politics. Just there's so many differences. It's hard to describe them all. You just know that when you get into these relationships, the way that they see the world, the way that they see culture, the way that they see what is and what is not acceptable can be different from what you know.
Let me ask a question that's also very controversial. You live in the New York area.
Yes.
And with a city like New York, Atlanta, where you have a lot of people, African Americans and Africans and Caribbeans living in the same place. Even my own mother believes that there is some tension in between the groups, primarily African American versus Caribbean, definitely African American versus African, in particular the Nigerian American community. I've heard several stories about the Caribbean versus African community in London. That was something I found out about here on this show. But I went to Howard University. I remember women would tell me that we get scholarships from Trinidad and Tobago to come here, that their parents told them not to bring an African American home. They could date anybody but that person. So I want to know that, and a lot of times, if you see, even like in America, the Ethiopian or Eritrean community, I never really saw people from the African American community that interacted with them in particular, and never any black men that were able to marry, let's say, Nigerian American women. I see Nigerian American men do it more often than that, but you don't really see a lot of African American men marry women from the African community. Maybe they do now a little bit more, but it wasn't very common. So did you ever face any, even though you're accomplished PhD, did you ever face any problems from the family because they thought of you less than because you were African American?
Okay. Not a controversial question at all. When you're talking about African diaspora relationships, the intercultural relationships between Black people, conflict has historically been the dominant topic of conversation. So that's not controversial at all. I'll tell you one thing, though. What I found when I moved to New York, and this is also what inspired me to start talking about these relationships. I didn't see a battle royal. It wasn't African American versus African versus Caribbean versus Afro Latino, and we're all at each other's throats. What I actually saw was many people in African diaspora relationships, as I was. I saw African Americans with Africans, saw African Americans with Caribbean. I saw Caribbean with African. I saw African Americans with Afro Latino. These intercultural relationships in New York are very common. My coworkers, many of them were in African diaspora relationships, and till today, probably 90% of the Black women I work with are African and Caribbean, and I get along with them very well. So I saw hundreds of other African diasporan couples, and in many cases, if they weren't a couple, I had friends and coworkers that were the product of these type of relationships.
Oh, yeah, yes.
One thing that's interesting my son, I spoke about my children. My oldest two are from my African ex-wife, and my youngest two are with my Caribbean wife. And last year, well, shortly before the pandemic, my son had a sleepover with his best friend, who is half Trinidadian and half African American. And another friend of his also is half African American, half Caribbean. And my son is half African and half African American. And I asked him, do you know how unusual that is? How unique that is? Right. And my son was like, doesn't everybody have African and Caribbean in their family? It's like, no. You know, three black boys with that type of background is unheard of. Unheard of, yes. In other places, but in New York, it's very common. So you had the rumors of us at each other's throats, and certainly it does happen in some cases. But I am a firm believer in the biggest barrier to African diaspora relationships happening on a greater scale is overcoming these stereotypes and overcoming, you know, the disconnect. And when we are among each other in significant numbers, it happens organically. We talk to each other. We find out that we, even with the cultural differences, we have things in common, and those things connect.
Let's talk about that, because we've been talking about a lot of the differences. And obviously, when I got to Uganda, when I first went, it's obvious that there are differences. But I did notice very quickly there are a lot of similarities, even though, you know, I can know that I was removed, my ancestors were removed from Africa for so many years. And as one of the first African Americans to go to Africa in my family, I was like, oh, I don't understand what they're saying in Luganda, but I can figure the rest of this out, you know, because I've seen it before. What are some of the similarities that the African American community have with many parts of the diaspora, no matter where they're from?
How we gather, love of food, even if it's different types of food, the love of food, the love of family, the love of music. And as you know, many of the type of instruments we use, the type of music we listen to is based in Africa. The one thing I write about in my book, you will have a chance to read it. You know, one thing I write about in my book is you know, how much Black immigration has influenced African American culture. Hip hop culture, you know, which is, you know, from my generation, from your generation too. I'm a little older than you, but still we're pretty much of the same generation. I grew up loving hip hop music. Hip hop music has a heavy Caribbean influence. Kool Herc, who's largely credited as the creator of hip hop, is from Jamaica. Grandmaster Flash is from Barbados. LL Cool J, Heavy D, KRS-One, Notorious B.I.G.
Yeah. Jay-Z,
Jay-Z. You know, most of the founders of hip hop were Caribbean, either directly from the Caribbean. And Kool Herc was a Jamaican immigrant. You know, he wasn't even born here to Jamaican parents. He actually was a Jamaican immigrant. You know, so many of those people that we love and admire were from the Caribbean, either foreign born or from foreign born parents. I talk about Malcolm X. Malcolm X is a product of African diaspora relationship, African American father and Caribbean mother. Marcus Garvey, who I know you know, Jamaican immigrant. Kwame Ture, also known as Stokely Carmichael, immigrant from Trinidad, also engaged in African diaspora relationships, marrying two African women and having his 2 children from there. So we've been influenced by Black immigrants in so many ways. There's so many avenues and areas that we're all connected, and we don't even realize it.
You know, let me talk about this because, you know, there are some horror stories, good stories, great stories, some horror stories, you know, now with the internet and, you have some people that are in these more or less long distance style of relationships, which is maybe in your time of doing it 22 years ago, it was more or less unheard of. But now with so many African Americans that are going to the continent for the first time and now establishing relationships, whether it be Tanzania, the Gambia, the Ghana, and places like that, and you have a lot of people, leaving and coming back and leaving and coming back, or Tinder, or there's certain groups like the one that you have. I believe one of the brothers was actually here on my channel from St. Louis with his wife. So now you have this whole long distance sort of relationship that's kind of starting to happen. We even had a brother named Brandon. I don't know if you've seen that episode. He was from Texas, and he was in Uganda about 3 weeks ago, and he's been in a long distance relationship, meeting somebody through a Facebook group like yours.
Yeah, let's talk about skin brother.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I did see that. I was he didn't name the group. I was very curious to know what which group it was. He didn't remember, but yes, I saw that.
Now let's talk about that dynamic, because that's something that's maybe people are meeting through these mediums, Facebook groups, like people like you create them and stuff like that. How powerful are these tools to introduce people from the diaspora and the African American community to one another through these kind of mediums?
It's interesting that you mentioned that, O'Shea. If I may, I'll go to my book.
Sure.
The focus of my book was to explore African diaspora relationships from almost an academic standpoint, to introduce what they are, to talk about how to meet Black people from different cultures, if you're interested in that, what to expect in the relationships, how to be successful in them. I interviewed couples that talked about their experiences. I wanted to answer every question that someone may have about being a Black person and dating or marrying another Black person from a different culture. So I wrote the book primarily from an African American standpoint, addressing what they need to know to date and marry somebody from Africa or the Caribbean. And primarily, I'm talking about meeting somebody that's foreign born in America. I dabble in meeting somebody, dating and marrying abroad, because again, I've been on the subject for 20 years, and it has changed in those last 20 years. Previously, with few exceptions, when you were entering an African diaspora relationship, it was going to happen in America. And now you do have brothers and sisters going to the continent that I see primarily, and meeting people. Another interesting thing that I've noticed is that for African American women, they seem to be focused more on West Africa.
Right.
And African American men seem to be focused more on East Africa, Uganda, Ethiopia, Kenya, some in South Africa. And of course, there are some in West Africa too. But right now, East Africa seems to be the focal point for African American men. It does have more challenges. A lot of the things I tell people to be on the watch for, learning as much as you can about your partner, being well versed in their culture, but learning as much as you possibly can, observing them over time. It's more challenging to do when you are dating abroad.
Let me ask you this last question because you brought something that up. A lot of African relationships are happening between African Americans, and because we don't typically travel to Africa, but more Africans tend to come to where we are. Mm-hmm. So that's a little different. But let me ask you this, in your honest opinion, because there are African Americans that are now living in Africa. Now, what scenario do you think is going to be easier, or does it matter? An African American that's living in Africa, dating an African woman, or an African woman who has moved to America and is living there and meets the African American. Which one of those two scenarios do you think are more difficult, or does it matter?
I always think it's easier for African in America, meeting an African American and having that relationship work. If for no other reason, you don't have to navigate their culture outside of the relationship. You're just focusing on a relationship. And within a relationship, you will experience the culture. You'll become more familiar with the culture, but you're not having to adjust to your environment. Living in Africa, you are adjusting to the environment and the relationship simultaneously. So that can be more challenging. You know, the learning curve is sharper. So depending on how quickly you adapt, how open-minded you are, you could encounter a lot more challenges. So it's speculation because I've only had of course, the experience being in the U.S.
It's a great point.
And with an African woman. So, you know, someone might come on and, Dr. Mark, you don't know what you're talking about. So, you know, I could be wrong, but from my observation, that's what I'm seeing.
Oh, so it's a great observation. Doc, I got a new topic next time we can do that. Why are so many African men choosing East Africa for West Africa? But I'm gonna give you some time if you research that. That'd be a good one because a lot of Black women are going to West Africa, and I do see there's guys in Rwanda and stuff like that. But tell everybody about your book. Before we close out here, and give them a pitch why they need to go ahead and buy it so we can make you rich.
Okay. Thank you. So let me hold the book up. African Diaspora Relationships, Dr. Mark Echols. So about this book, to my knowledge, it's the first exploration of what it's like to be a Black person dating and marrying another Black person from a different culture. In other words, being an African American, dating and married to someone from Africa, the Caribbean, South or Central America, or a European of African descent. So I explore it in every way you possibly can. I answer every question that anyone possibly can answer about these type of relationships. I talk about how we're connected. I try to take a statistical look at exactly how many Black people are in these type of relationships. O'Shea, just for your information, based on research I did from an earlier study, it estimated that about 3% of Black marriages are African diasporan relationships in the U.S. That was about 20 years ago that study was done. So, of course, since then, the immigration, Black immigration has continued to increase. Right now, it's about 9%. 9% of the Black population are foreign born. It's believed it'll be 17% by 2060. So these relationships are going to continue to grow.
Okay. Well, Dr. Mark, you've done it. I knew he was going to be good when I saw the book. I said, "This is a brother that's can read and write real well." So I knew it was going to be a good one. So, Doc, I think hopefully you can come back and bless us again, guys. We want to put the book. He's the only person that I know that has written a book on the subject, and I was so glad. Yeah, and I was so glad. Maybe he can come back on. We asked time. He did a wonderful job. Go to the first comment pinned to the top, guys. Let's support the good doctor and purchase this book. These are the kind of people that we need in our community to be elevating. This is why this channel is more or less for brothers like this, because we're trying to solve the problems in the Black world, not overnight, but here as we can on the Kingana YouTube channel. So I really thank you, Doc, for you taking your time out today. I know I was a little bit late, but I thank you for dealing with that. And any last words?
All I have to say again, O'Shea, is to thank you again. You know, if I could piggyback on one point, you were talking about the internet and how important that is in making African diaspora relationships happen. You know, the internet has made the world smaller, and it helps to connect us. And you yourself have played a big role in connecting the diaspora. So my last thoughts and comments, and again, it's just thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for all the work you do.
No problem, brother. Thank you so much. And guys, make sure that you guys check out the book, First Come to the Top. Let's make him a bestseller. If he's not already one, we'll make him one today. And guys, thank you so much. And as you know, keep it real, Kingana forever. We're out.